Welcome to the sleepy shore, a quiet place where stories drift like waves and peaceful nights begin. Here you are safe. Here you can let go. This channel was created to be a resting place, a soft landing at the end of your day, a quiet harbor for tired thoughts, busy minds, and restless hearts, whether you're here because sleep feels far away, or because you simply want a moment of stillness. You are exactly where you need to be. At the sleepy shore, we tell stories, but not the kind that demand your attention. These are slow, gentle tales, carefully written to soothe your mind, to soften the edges of the day, and to help you drift without pressure into deep, restful sleep. We believe in the power of soft voices, slow pacing, and beautiful imagery to calm the nervous system and ease you slowly out of your thinking self and into your dreaming self. Each episode is a new journey, sometimes to quiet villages or foggy forests, sometimes to lighthouses, forgotten islands, or cozy cottages. Always peaceful, always kind, always gentle. You'll hear original bedtime stories crafted with care, designed to guide you into the deep, quiet stillness of the night. So if your mind has been racing, if your body is holding on to the day, let it go now. There's nothing left you need to do. Now is time for rest. Nestle in, close your eyes, let the story carry you, and let the waves of the sleepy shore wash gently over your thoughts until they dissolve into dreams. Welcome to Wren Isle, where the sea is slow, the light is steady, and sleep comes quietly, like the turning of the tide. You've found the sleepy shore, and here you can rest. The sea was still that evening, quiet, like it too was ready to sleep. Waves lapped gently against the sides of the ferry, slow, even, steady, like breathing, like your breathing, soft sigh. Elodie sat near the bow, wrapped in a shawl the color of ash and cloud. The last light of day painted the sky in violet and gold, fading slowly into gray. The wind stirred gently, lifting strands of her hair and carrying the scent of salt and something faintly sweet, maybe heather or pine. Ahead in the mist, Wren Isle waited, a quiet silhouette, rising from the sea, wrapped in silver fog. She wasn't afraid. She didn't come for adventure. She came for stillness, for silence, for sleep. Pause. The ferry's engine hummed softly beneath her feet, a lullaby made of metal and memory. The captain, a quiet man in a wool cap, stood at the wheel, humming to himself as the island neared. "You'll find the lighthouse up the path," he called. "Hard to miss. Light's been burning every night for 30 years. The keeper never leaves." Elodie nodded, as if that made perfect sense. She hadn't come here by accident. Tucked inside one of her grandmother's old books, she'd found a letter, faded ink, signed only "The Keeper." It spoke of a place where stars felt close enough to touch, where silence wrapped around you like a warm coat, and time moved slowly like tides that no longer rush. Soft sigh. The ferry bumped gently against the dock, the sound of rope, the thud of wood against wood, the quiet click of footsteps on damp planks. Elodie stepped onto the dock. The air welcomed her with its hush. Storm coming in a day or two, the captain said. Eyes on the sky, she looked up, clouds low and heavy, watching from the horizon. I'll be ready, she said. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Pause. The path from the dock curved gently through low hills. Grass swayed in the breeze, brushing her ankles like sleepy cats. A lantern hung crooked on a wooden post, its flame flickering gently like an eye half closed. She followed its glow. The silence of the island was not empty. It was full of calm, full of breath, full of waiting. Soft exhale. The lighthouse appeared slowly over the hill, tall, still, watching. Its lantern turned steadily, casting a beam across sea and land alike. Gold dot, 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 then gone, then gold again. Beside the tower stood a stone cottage, low and solid, with a chimney puffing soft smoke into the mist. A window glowed behind lace curtains. She stepped through the gate. It creaked politely. The path of white stones led her to the door. She knocked once, then again. Brief silence. Footsteps. Software measured. The door opened. A man stood there, older, calm, his face worn by the sea and the years, but kind. You must be Elodie, he said. She nodded. I hope I'm not intruding. He smiled. I've been expecting you. Soft pause, intimate tone. The warmth inside met her like an embrace. Books, firelight, the smell of something baking. Bread, or maybe apples. The chair by the hearth wore a woolen throw, folded with care. You'll want something warm before the fog thickens, he said. She sat, letting the room wrap around her, a bowl of stew, a piece of bread, silence, not awkward, but companionable. Shared. Outside, the lighthouse turned, the sea whispered. Elodie felt her body loosen, her mind quiet. Tomorrow, she would ask questions, but tonight, she would rest. Soft sigh, and so she did. Soft breath. Morning came slowly to Wren Isle, the kind of morning where the world stretches, yawns in silence, and forgets, just for a little while, to be busy. Elodie stirred beneath the soft quilt, the scent of sea air drifting through the open window, cool and gentle, like a whisper across the skin. Pause. She blinked up at the ceiling, dark wooden beams stretching across pale walls. Faint gull calls echoed beyond the glass, soft and distant, like they too were only half awake. Her eyes moved to the bedside table. A pitcher of fresh water, a ceramic cup, and a tiny bundle of dried lavender tied with a strand of twine. Soft sigh. Someone had thought of everything. She sat up slowly, the ache of travel still tucked into her limbs, but softened now, like muscles remembered they didn't have to run anymore. Downstairs, the scent of warm oats and toasted bread rose like a quiet invitation. There was something sweet mixed in, apples maybe, cinnamon. She stood, stretched, and padded barefoot down the narrow wooden stairs. Each step creaked gently beneath her, as though greeting her by name. Pause. Aldrich stood by the stove, humming a tune so soft it might not have been there at all. The fire crackled low, its warmth drifting out across the room like an old friend. The table was already set. 2 mugs, a pot of honey, and a plate of sliced bread still warm from the oven. He looked up as she entered. "Morning, Elodie," he said. His voice was calm like the tide. "I hope you slept well." She nodded softly. "Better than I have in a long time." "Good," he replied. "There's no hurry here. The day takes care of itself." Soft sigh. They ate in silence, not the kind that feels heavy, but the kind that lets you breathe, that makes space, that asks nothing in return. Outside, the lighthouse turned slowly. The sea breathed in and out, and the world stayed still. When the meal was done, Aldrich rose and stretched. "Would you like a tour?" he asked. Elodie smiled. "I'd love one." Pause. He led her out through the back door, around the base of the lighthouse. Up close, it was grander than she'd expected. Weathered stone, streaked with salt and sea, and speckled with patches of lichen that looked like tiny maps. A small wooden door sat nestled in the base. Aldrich reached beneath his sweater and pulled a brass key from a cord around his neck. He unlocked it, and the hinges gave a soft sigh. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of metal, oil, and thyme. A spiral staircase curled upward through the heart of the tower. Light filtered in through small round windows, like pieces of the moon scattered along the wall. Their footsteps echoed as they climbed, each step worn, each one telling 1,000 silent stories. They passed alcoves stacked with coiled rope, glass bottles of lantern oil, and tools laid out in precise lines. At the very top, the room opened like a shell. Soft inhale. The lantern stood at its center dash. Polished brass, faceted glass, turning slowly, patiently. Its flame was not large, but it burned with a strange, steady light. Alive, present. "She never goes out," Aldrich said quietly, his hand resting on the brass rail. "Not through storms, not through sickness, not even when no one is watching." Elodie stepped forward. "She's beautiful," she whispered. He nodded. "I've kept her lit for over 30 years. Before me it was my uncle. before him, Maera. She lived here alone with her cat and her garden, and before her no one remembers, but the light's always been here. Pause. They stood in silence, watching the lantern turn. It swept across the sea, across the cliffs, then returned again. "Why do you keep it going?" Elodie asked. Aldrich smiled, but it was a quiet kind of smile. "Because it matters," he said. "Even if no one sees it, it matters." Soft sigh. Later, he showed her the gardens, neat rows of herbs and wild flowers, a woodshed with tools stacked just so, and finally, a little writing room tucked above the kitchen, with a window that looked out over the eastern shore. Inside, a desk, a candle, and a journal filled with Aldrich's handwriting. Elodie sat by the window. The sea stretched out endlessly before her. She opened the journal, read weather notes, poems, fragments of thought. She turned to a blank page, picked up the pen, and wrote, "The light never sleeps, and neither does kindness." Soft pause. She closed the book and let the moment rest. Outside, the gulls called softly. The lantern turned above. The sea breathed in and out, and inside her something small and beautiful had begun to settle. Soft breath in. There are certain days when the wind tells stories, not loudly, not in words, but in soft, winding sighs that curl between trees and brush against windows and make you pause mid-thought, just to listen. It was a day like that, still morning, but the sky had already turned a soft silver. Not quite rain, but not dry either. Elodie stood beneath the old olive tree, its twisted trunk wrapped in ivy, its branches swaying gently above her. She held her shawl close around her shoulders, eyes drifting out across the moorland beyond the lighthouse. Sigh. The grass rippled in long, lazy waves, like the land itself was breathing, and the wind was murmuring, carrying something old and not quite nameable. Behind her the lighthouse stood still, tall, solid, patient. The sea whispered against the cliffs below, and gulls wheeled in the distance. But it was the wind that held her there. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, it almost sounded like a voice, not sharp, not sudden, just gentle, calling. Long pause. A moment later she turned, startled by the creak of a floorboard behind her. It was Aldrich. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, watching the horizon. Then, quietly, as though afraid to break the spell, he said, "You heard it too, didn't you?" Elodie glanced at him, half expecting a smile or a wink, but his expression was soft, almost reverent. "I think so," she whispered. It sounded familiar somehow, even though I know I've never heard it before. Aldrich nodded. "It's always been that way here. Wren Isle isn't just a place. It listens and it remembers." Soft exhale. They stood there together for a while, wrapped in wind and silence, until the lighthouse bell rang once, low and deep, like a heartbeat. It was noon. Aldrich stepped back. "There's something I want to show you," he said. "Come with me." Pause. He led her along a narrow path she hadn't seen before, winding behind the gardens through a thin stand of crooked birch trees, their bark pale and flaking like old paper. The ground dipped downward, moss grew thick underfoot, and stones jutted like bones from the earth. Then they came upon it, an old stone circle, just 6 pillars, half buried and leaning with time, but still standing, still watching. Elodie's breath caught. She didn't know why, but the place felt sacred, quiet in a different way, not empty, but listening. Aldrich stepped into the center. "There are stories," he said, "that these stones were placed here before the lighthouse was even dreamed of, before the village, before names." She stepped forward slowly, letting her fingers graze the cool surface of one stone. It tingled, like the air before a summer storm. "And what were they for?" she asked. He smiled. "No one really knows, but the wind seems to gather here as if it remembers." Long breath. Elodie stood in the center, eyes closed again, and this time the whisper was clearer. A name, barely audible, carried on the air, and gone. She opened her eyes. "Aldrich," she began, but he was already watching her. "You heard it?" She nodded. Soft sigh. They didn't stay much longer. The sky was darkening at the edges, and the wind had grown restless. That afternoon, as rain gently tapped the windows, Elodie sat by the hearth, the lighthouse logbook in her lap. She flipped through pages, entries written by keepers long gone. Each note was dated, weathered, signed with careful script. And then, tucked between 2 brittle sheets, she found something curious. A loose scrap of paper, different handwriting, delicate, precise. It read, "If the wind speaks, listen. If the stone warms, stay. This island remembers what others forget." Elodie read it twice, then again. Soft exhale. She placed the note back into the logbook and closed it slowly. The wind howled once, faintly, as if in approval. That night the rain fell in earnest, soft and steady, blanketing the house, the hill, the stones in a hush of silver. Elodie sat beside Aldrich at the fire, their mugs warm in their hands. The logs popped quietly, casting golden shadows that danced across the walls. "I think I'm beginning to understand," she said. Aldrich turned to her, his gaze calm. "Good," he whispered. "You don't need to name it. Just keep listening." She nodded, and as the fire dwindled and the rain played its lullaby across the roof, she felt the weight in her chest loosen just a little more. She would sleep deeply tonight, and perhaps in her dreams the wind would speak again. Soft breath in, There are rooms in old houses that seem to vanish until they're ready to be found. They hide in corners of memory, in long-forgotten stairwells, behind doors that don't quite fit their frames. And on a quiet grey morning, Elodie discovered one. Soft sigh. She had been looking for candles. A sudden storm had knocked out the power. Not that the lighthouse ever relied on much electricity, but the storm. It had come in fast and wild, and the corners of the house now sat in shadow. Aldrich had gone to check the roof, leaving Elodie to search the lower floors. She moved through the hall slowly, bare feet silent against the old wooden boards. Each room she passed felt heavier somehow, as if the storm had seeped in through the windows and curled itself into every corner. She paused at the end of the hallway, where a narrow staircase curved downward. Odd. She didn't remember seeing it before, and she had wandered this house more times than she could count. Still, the door stood open, barely a sliver of darkness, inviting. Soft breath out. The air shifted as she descended, cooler, not damp, but old, as though the dust held its breath here. At the bottom was a corridor, stone walls, arched ceiling, and a single door. Thick wood, iron hinges, unmarked. She hesitated, then turned the handle. Wood creaks slowly open. The room beyond was not what she expected. It was warm, not cold and forgotten, but lived in. Software light spilled in from a small circular window. At the far end, a kind of porthole, and dust motes shimmered in the beam like tiny stars. Elodie stepped inside. Bookshelves lined the walls, but not like the grand library upstairs. These were humble volumes, worn, personal. A journal lay open on the desk. Beside it, a pair of round spectacles and a faded photograph, its corners curled inward with age. She moved closer. The photograph was of a woman, smiling softly, standing in front of the lighthouse. She turned the journal gently, each page filled with neat, elegant script. March 18th. The sea was restless today. I dreamed of the stones again. They whispered my name. I'm beginning to think they remember me. Elodie's breath caught. She flipped forward. April 2nd. There was a voice in the wind, not outside, inside the lighthouse. It said, "Keep watching, keep waiting." Long pause, soft sigh. There were pages and pages, a quiet life recorded by someone who had lived in this house long before her. And yet, the dreams, the whispers, the wind. She was not the first. Elodie sat slowly in the worn leather chair beside the desk. It welcomed her, like it remembered. She rested her hands in her lap, eyes drifting shut for just a moment, and then a sound, soft tapping, not loud, like fingers against glass. She opened her eyes. There, at the porthole window, a single black feather pressed against the glass, by the hand of the wind. Elodie rose and opened the window a crack. The feather lifted, twirled once, and vanished. Behind her the pages of the journal fluttered. Not wildly, just one, turning softly, deliberately. She stepped back to the desk. The new page was blank, except for one line, written at the very bottom. "Don't forget me." Elodie stared at the words, and something in her chest, deep beneath the stillness, tightened. She took the journal in her hands, closed it, and held it close. This room was not forgotten. Not really. It had simply waited for someone to remember. Soft exhale. She left the door open when she climbed the stairs. Somehow she knew the room didn't want to be closed anymore. Upstairs, Aldrich had returned. His coat was soaked with rain, and his cheeks were wind-kissed, but he was smiling. "You found her room," he said gently. Elodie paused. "You knew about it." "I did," he nodded. "But she never wanted it spoken of. Said it would find its way back to someone when the time was right." "She?" He nodded. "The lighthouse keeper's wife. Her name was Marianne. She passed many years ago, but some things stay." Elodie held the journal up. "She was listening too," she said quietly, "just like us." Aldrich's smile faded into something softer. "Perhaps we all are," he said. "We just don't always realize it." That night, as the storm faded into a whisper of rain, Elodie placed the journal on her bedside table. She lit a single candle, let the flame dance, and as she curled into the quilt, the wind swept gently along the eaves, no longer howling, but humming. She closed her eyes. Somewhere, beneath the floorboards, in the old forgotten room, the pages waited, and the house, ever patient, continued to remember. Soft inhale. There's something different about the sea at night. It doesn't rush or roar, but waits. Patient, endless, listening. And on this particular night, Elodie stood at the edge of the lantern room, watching the tide shimmer like silver. The storm had passed. Clouds had been swept away by the breath of the sea, leaving behind a sky so clear you could fall into it. Soft exhale. The full moon hung low, bright and round, casting pale light across the waves. It was nearly silent. No gulls, no wind, only the steady tick of the old clock in the lantern room, and the soft creak of the lighthouse's bones, settling into stillness. Elodie hugged her shawl closer. It wasn't cold, just hushed, as if something was about to arrive or leave. She wasn't sure which. Pause. Aldrich sat behind her at the little table, sorting through old logbooks. They'd been trying to piece together the lighthouse's earliest years, pages yellowed with age, names she'd never heard of, dates reaching back more than a century. "Elodie," he murmured, his voice soft against the quiet. "Did you know this place once had a twin?" She turned. "A twin?" He nodded, sliding a book her way. "There used to be 2 lighthouses here, built just a few miles apart, facing one another across a sharp stretch of sea. They were designed to mirror each other, so ships could pass safely between them. Elodie leaned over the open page, a sketched map, 2 towers, 2 beams of light crossing like distant hands. She traced the lines with her fingertip. What happened to the other one? Aldrich shrugged. Collapsed or abandoned. The records aren't clear. Some say it fell in a storm. Others say it just went dark. He looked out the window behind her. But sometimes, on clear nights like this, they say you can still see its light. Soft breath in. Elodie turned back to the sea. The horizon was a quiet silver thread. Nothing stirred, no light, just the moon watching in silence. Still, she waited. They sat like that for some time. Her eyes on the sea, his on the past. Eventually Aldrich rose, gathered the books, and stretched. "I'll head down," he said with a quiet smile. "Don't stay too long." She nodded, and then she was alone, just her, the sea, and the moon. Soft sigh. It was then that the fog began to rise, not fast, not sudden, but slowly, from the base of the cliffs, sliding upward like breath from the ocean itself. It curled around the rocks, software silent, and then Elodie saw it. Pause. A flash far in the distance, a brief beam of light, pale and thin but unmistakable. It pulsed once, then again, then disappeared. She blinked. Nothing. Just the fog and the waiting moon. She leaned forward, palms against the cool glass, and then another flicker. Not the moon, not lightning, a signal. She turned, rushed down the spiral stairs, 2 at a time, bare feet barely touching the steps. Aldrich was in the kitchen, tea steaming between his hands. She slid into the room, breath catching. "I saw it." He looked up. "Saw what?" "The other lighthouse," she said, voice barely above a whisper. There was a light, just for a moment, a signal. Aldrich set his cup down slowly. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I've never seen anything like it. Not a ship, not a flare. It was like ours, but older, tired." He stood thoughtful. "Then maybe it's time," he said softly, to light a reply. Soft inhale. Back in the lantern room, Elodie watched as Aldrich carefully adjusted the old mechanisms. The lens gleamed in the moonlight. Waiting, he turned to her. "When the time feels right," he said, "pull the lever." She nodded and waited. The fog drifted. The stars turned. Then a flicker. The distant light again, faint, like a memory. She pulled the lever. The beam of their lighthouse arched across the sea. A pause, another flicker, and again they answered, back and forth, the 2 lights, reaching across time and distance, not a conversation of words, but of rhythm, of presence, soft exhale. Elodie felt her heartbeat settle. Whatever the other light was, whoever tended it, they had been waiting, and now they knew they weren't alone. Eventually, the distant flicker faded. The fog pulled back, but their own light remained, steady, glowing reassurance. Elodie stepped back from the lens. Aldrich stood beside her, watching the sea. "You did well," he said gently. "Sometimes the past just wants to be seen." She nodded, and beneath her feet the lighthouse hummed quietly, a low, contented sound. That night, as she slipped beneath her quilt, Elodie could still see the flicker in her mind's eye, like a hand lifted in greeting or in thanks. The waves outside sighed against the shore, and the wind whispered gently around the stones. She drifted easily to sleep, the lighthouse watching over her, its beam still stretching into the dark, a signal to whatever else might be waiting somewhere out there. Another light, another story, another dream. Soft inhale. The wind had changed. You could feel it even before you stepped outside. It wasn't colder, just different, like the breath of a new chapter whispering at the edges of the sea. Elodie rose early that morning. The mist still clung to the windows, and the tide hadn't yet turned. She stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching the world slowly wake. The lighthouse, for all its age and quiet, felt alive. Soft pause. Aldrich had left a note on the table, just 4 words, "Up top, bring bread." She smiled sleepily, wrapped a slice in cloth, and climbed the winding stairs to the lantern room. The air up there was crisp, salted, still carrying the hush of dawn. Aldrich stood near the lens, his coat pulled close, his silhouette outlined by the soft grey light. He didn't turn as she entered. Instead, he spoke quietly. "Do you ever feel like the sea is asking you something?" Elodie walked to his side, offered him the bread. He took it absently, but his gaze never left the horizon. "You mean like it's waiting?" He nodded slowly. "Exactly." Soft breath in. The sea below was perfectly still, as if it too was holding its breath. "There's something coming," he added. "Not bad, not good, just change." Elodie followed his gaze, though she saw nothing but endless grey blue. "Do you know what it is?" Aldrich finally looked at her. "Number, but I think it's your decision to make." She blinked. "My decision?" He nodded. "I've stayed here for years, watched the tides, lit the flame, told the stories, but the lighthouse, it doesn't need me anymore." She felt a quiet shift inside her chest, a weight she hadn't known was there. "You're leaving?" Soft sigh. Aldrich smiled, gentle, warm, a little tired. "Not forever, but yes. I think my part in this place is done." He looked around the lantern room, eyes softening. "It's time for someone else to keep the light." Pause. They stood in silence for a while. The sea moved beneath them like a sleeping creature. Elodie's fingers brushed the old brass railing. She thought of the night she first saw the flicker, the moonlight, the signal, the pull of something ancient and unknown. And she thought of how steady the beam had felt when she'd answered. She'd belonged to this place even before she realized it. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, certain. "Then I'll stay." Aldrich smiled again, and this time there was a hint of relief in the curve of his lips. "I knew you would." Soft breath out. That afternoon they walked the shoreline together, a farewell of sorts. He showed her the stones. He used to read the tide's mood, the cliff path hidden by wild rosemary, the hollow in the rocks where the seals sometimes slept. There was no rush, no need for ceremony, just two keepers passing time and trust between them. By evening, Aldrich's bag was packed, small, light. He would take the supply boat when it came in the morning, but tonight, one last meal. They sat by the fire in the common room, a gentle supper between them. Outside, the sea stirred softly. The sky pressed close to the windows. The world was listening. Soft exhale. After the plates were cleared, they didn't speak much. Aldrich played a quiet tune on the old sea-weathered piano in the corner, and Elodie sat nearby watching the flame dance, and the shadows stretched long. When the song ended, she spoke without thinking. "What do you think the sea wanted me to say yes to?" He looked at her. Then, with great care, he replied, "To being seen, to being heard, to answering the light with one of your own." She nodded, heart soft and full. It made sense now. This wasn't just about tending lamps or logging ships. It was about listening and answering. Soft breath in. The next morning, Aldrich stood at the dock as the boat pulled away. Elodie waved until he disappeared into the rising mist. Then she turned and walked slowly back to the lighthouse, to her lighthouse. She climbed to the lantern room, opened the windows wide, and let the breeze fill the space. The sea stretched wide before her, unending, unfolding. Elodie reached for the logbook, a new entry, her handwriting steady. Day 1, keeper, Elodie, the light is lit. Soft exhale. And somewhere, in the distance, on a coastline yet unseen, perhaps another light flickered in reply, not because it was expected, but because someone, somewhere was listening. Final sentence for listeners. So, if your eyes are growing heavy and your thoughts are floating gently on the waves, know that the lighthouse is lit, the sea is calm, and you are safe to drift into sleep. Good night from the sleepy shore.